Whoa, let's just... There we go. We're all good. Hi guys, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out. Hope you enjoyed the talk tonight, and thanks for everyone watching it on YouTube as well. That's great. And I thought I'd make a special mention to one or two people from overseas who watch it and support the channel on YouTube. There's Jeff Miller-Sachs in California, Audrey and Danielle, Carrion from Georgia, USA, John Harrington, Boston, John Badisky, Toronto, and Phil McBean in Melbourne. Just a bit of a plug there. Thanks for your support, guys, for the channel. So let's get underway. So, NASA, Elon Musk's SpaceX program, the Chinese space program, they've all said they're going to Mars. They're sending astronauts to Mars sometime in the 2030s. It's going to happen, it's fact. And hey, it may be a relative of yours, might be a close relative, son or daughter, might be a niece or a nephew or a neighbour or a friend. And that's why we're going to stop and think a bit more about this, what it's going to entail. Now, just a little thought experiment. Forget your current circumstances. The year is 2035. You're aged 35 years. You've got some important skills. You've got no strong family ties. You've got a sense of adventure. And NASA knocks on your door and says, we'd like you to come away, return trip to Mars. You'll be back again in 3 years. We'll give you $1 million. And you say to them, I've got two questions for you. First, I want to confirm, we're talking US $1 million here, aren't we? And the answer to that is yes. The next thing you say to them is, surely there must be a few hazards, potential risks to me, health-wise and functioning and possible accidents and so on that could happen while I'm there and on the way back. What can you tell me about those hazards and risks? And what sort of research are you doing? And what are you guys doing about this? And they say back to you, we got Chris doing a talk on Monday night. Go along to the talk and ring us back on Tuesday morning. And that's why tonight's talk is titled Hazards of Human Spaceflight to Mars, Things You Guys Need to Know. And I'm going to show you tonight that with advancing technology, come, say, 2035, yes, travel to Mars will be relatively safe. So, how are we going to just do it? I've split it into three main chapters. Why go to Mars? Just a very simple slide on that one. Just it's important to say, can you remind me why we're doing this again? Then we'll talk about the physical challenges and countermeasures, and then we'll sum up and conclude. So, why go to Mars? Can anyone just give me one good reason why go to Mars? Yes?
If Earth gets destroyed, we can go to Mars.
Yes. Asteroid, politicians, all sorts of reasons. I didn't mention any names. I gave a talk one time, and I won't mention names. A prominent politician in New Zealand's name was mentioned right up front. Anyway, like asteroids. And essentially, it's a survival. It's like an insurance policy for the human race. So we're no longer a one-planet species. You've got to think of natural events like an asteroid. You know, who's seen the movie Don't Look Up? Pretty scary, huh? Yeah, you saw it. Geological events, climate events. Look at what we're doing to climate change. You've got massive volcanoes. Volcanoes are thought to play a role in the dinosaurs' demise as well as the comet. Overpopulation, pandemic diseases. Earth is just a limited resource, and we're just populating at an exponential rate. God, we're just finished with a pandemic. Misuse of humanity's 21st century technology. I read something beautiful the other day, and actually it was probably a couple of years ago, and it said that if mankind is not careful with its 21st century technology, nature, or history I should say, history will record humanity as being nature's brief but colourful experiment with proto-intelligence. We were clever enough to build the stuff, but not clever enough to control it, or ourselves for that matter. So we're going to Mars, guys. Buckle up, we're on a journey tonight. So that's why I go to Mars. How about the physical challenges and countermeasures? Going into space, I mean, the alien environment of space affects almost every organ in the body. It has some sort of effect. And we could be talking all night about it. So rather than spread myself over, just skim over things, I thought we'd focus on what I see are the three main points here. Effects on the heart and body fluids, also known as the cardiovascular system. The effects on the bones and muscles of the body, known as the musculoskeletal system, and the effects of radiation. So that's where I'm going to put my focus tonight's talk. The first two, on the cardiovascular and musculoskeletal system, predominantly the main effect is from prolonged weightlessness. It's going to be the journey to Mars and the journey home again, and then the exposure to ionizing radiation we'll talk about. So let's look about the effects on the heart and the body fluids. We'll talk about the 5 changes that occur to the cardiovascular system in space. We'll talk about the research that's going on and the countermeasures. Okay, so these are the 5 main things that happen to your heart and your body fluids, known as the cardiovascular system. There's a blood volume shift and reduction. So these are the 5 that I'm going to go through in more detail shortly. Astronauts become anemic. There's a reduced heart mass and aerobic capacity. Cardiac arrhythmias, post-flight low blood pressure on standing. We're going to talk about all these in some detail now. But the bottom line is here, you do not want an astronaut arriving at Mars feeling weak, unconditioned with a low blood pressure. I think you can see from those 5 points, that's where you're going to end up if you don't do anything about it. So here's a couple of astronauts, or I should say American astronaut Scott Kelly and the Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko. And these look sort of, pretty average sort of guys, don't they? Look pretty normal, nice sort of, sort of facial features, chin, creases in his neck, nice, normal jawline up there and so on. And the same for Mikhail. So let's put them in space. So that's pre-flight. Let's put them in space. Check that out. Check these dudes out, man. Well, yeah, look at them. Look at their faces. They're all puffed up. You can hardly see their chins. Their necklines have gone. All their faces are puffed up. Look at their upper chests, all their upper torsos, all pumped up and stuff. That's what happened to them. And this change happens really quickly in space. So you might say, yeah, what's going on here? How did all this come about? And as soon as you're in space, those sort of stuff happens instantly. You suddenly do not have the constant downward force or legward force of gravity. So suddenly all the fluids will start shifting upwards. And in the first 6 to 12 hours, up to 2 litres of fluid will move, this is within the blood system and within the tissue, will start moving from your legs, your lower torso, and will all start coming up to your chest and your arms. Up to 2 litres within the first 6 to 12 hours. Incredible. Hence they get their very puffy face, very congested nasally. They often complain of altered taste as well. Then over the next 1 to 2 days, up to 1 litre of fluid, blood fluid, moves from the blood system out into the tissues. Remember, this is all happening in the upper part of the body. And you might think, what's causing that? Most likely, the upper torso and the upper head and neck is blood pressures tend to be a little bit lower. It makes sense because gravity's pulling everything down, so the resistance is less up there. Suddenly you've got all this fluid moving up. So you find little capillaries where the oxygen is transfused and arteries turn to veins. Those capillaries become over-congested and overburdened. So you start getting a bit of leakage of fluid across into the tissues, but also you start getting leaking of a very important protein called albumin. It's involved with fluid balance. It's produced in the liver. It's very, very important. You start getting that starts seeping through the overburdened capillaries into the tissues of the body, the extravascular, outside the blood vessel tissues. And with osmosis, fluid follows out. Remember osmosis at school? You put some salts or proteins on one side, a semi-permeable membrane, and the fluid shoots through. And that's what's going on. And so you've got all those effects that potentiate each other. Suddenly the astronauts become quite bloated, but because they've also lost a litre of fluid out of their blood system, they've suddenly got very low blood pressures as well. So that's what's going on there. Astronauts become anemic. Now you might think, say what? You just said that they've lost a litre of fluid from their blood system. Doesn't that make their red cell more concentrated? I'll tell you a little bit of physiology. Is that the kidneys are designed to monitor the amount of oxygen tension or red blood cell concentration in the blood. And if it detects that the concentration is getting a bit low or the oxygen tension is getting down, it wants to do something about that. So it produces a hormone called erythropoietin, also abbreviated as EPO, and that hormone then goes to the bone marrow, stimulates the bone marrow to suddenly producing more red blood cells. Hey, I need more oxygen carrying ability, guys, it's saying. So it produces more red blood cells, and that's how it works. And a lot of the people in renal failure, they will do that to correct the anemia. They'll take erythropoietin injections. Athletes, they do the altitude climbing for that exact, they do training at high altitudes for that exact reason. And some of the cheats actually take EPO injections themselves to boost it up. So here it's the opposite. The kidneys pick up, so look, you've got a litre of fluid that's all seeped out into the tissues. So the kidney says, hey, we've got a higher concentration of red blood cells than we really should have here. We're oversaturated. Let's switch the erythropoietin off and let things adjust. Erythropoietin levels drop. Bone marrows, the stimulation, produce more red cells, get switched off. Red blood cell count drops, and you've got an anemic astronaut. So things aren't looking so hot for these guys. Next thing is, oh, bless you. Because suddenly the heart is without the force of gravity. So gravity's not pulling it down, and it pulls in sort of almost like a pear sort of shape. It's a lot fatter at the bottom, the heart. So suddenly it doesn't have that pulling effect, so it becomes more spherical. It no longer has to pump really hard against the force of gravity to pump blood out, so it becomes more spherical. It actually loses up to 10% of the mass of the heart muscle gets lost over a period of time in spaceflight, because suddenly the heart doesn't have to work. So it becomes a bit smaller, more spherical, and it loses some mass as well. The same process starts going on in the arteries as well. The arteries have to have some musculature to have some tone to keep the blood pressure up and so on. They start getting lazy as well and losing some muscle mass in the arteries. So essentially, in summary, it's a cardiac deconditioning that's going on okay. Now, that's going on in space. Now, that's okay in space. You can function. That's the whole point. There's no troubles for the astronaut in space in this state. This is just body physiology changing to its new environment. The problem is when you get to Mars or you get back to Earth, you're going to be in some strife. And indeed, all these sort of scary changes that I've mentioned, the cardiac function does return to pre-flight levels usually within about a month. But of course, if you're going to Mars, you don't have a month up your sleeve. You've got to start performing when you get there. So they've got to do something about that. Cardiac arrhythmias, that's when you lose the normal rhythm of the heart. So it might be the heart is beating too quickly, too slowly, or erratically, not in a regular manner. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? Two things. One is it's very inefficient. So when you get to Mars, you're not going to be able to do some meaningful work. It's part of being out of condition. And also potentially dangerous. Some arrhythmias can be dangerous and can lead to a cardiac arrest. So why does it all come about? They don't know for sure, but there's a lot of speculation. The heart's electrical circuit or network of electrical fibres runs throughout the heart. Hello, suddenly your heart structure is changing. The heart's got smaller, it's got rounder, its configuration has changed. God knows what's happening inside to those electrical circuits and stuff. So you got that. The astronauts under stress, they get dehydrated, they can get electrolyte disturbances, low sodium and potassium levels and stuff. That can cause conduction problems. So there's a lot of potential causes of what's going on, but they do see cardiac arrhythmias in some astronauts. Jim Irwin, Apollo 15, astronaut on the moon, about 3 days, he was in and out of atrial fibrillation throughout a lot of the moonwalking. They put that down to excessive stress, sweating, losing a lot of potassium, and that threw him into that rhythm. That's, makes you very inefficient. He could have got quite short of breath. He could have got into trouble up there, medical trouble. The Mir, there was an astronaut on the Mir, Russian Mir space station in the 1980s, was noted to be in a short run of ventricular tachycardia, VT. Now, anyone with a bit of medical knowledge knows that's one step away from ventricular fibrillation, which equals instant death, cardiac arrest material. So, so it can be inefficient and it's potentially very dangerous. So that's another thing the astronauts have to potentially contend with. Yeah, so as you can imagine, they've lost all this fluid from their blood system. Their hearts changed, their blood pressures have dropped, a lot of things going on. The blood vessels have got lazy over this period of time. So when they do come back to Earth, or could be Mars, suddenly the cardiovascular system is just not used to it. And they've got really low blood pressure called orthostatic hypotension, low blood pressure on standing. And that's a real problem. You've probably seen this sort of scene before with the astronauts sitting in their seats when they come back because they can't stand properly. 2/3 of astronauts have trouble standing for 10 minutes just after 2 weeks in space. 2/3 of them. That's just after 2 weeks in space. 2 out of 3 astronauts have trouble standing for 10 minutes. If they've been there for about 3 months in space, 4 out of 5 have trouble standing for about 10 minutes. So once again, you've got to think of, you get to Mars, you can't afford just to sit down and say, oh, I've been on a space flight, I can't get out of here in a hurry and some emergency is going on. So what are they doing about it in terms of research? And one of the recurring themes in here is these astronauts, they are real guinea pigs. They're in and out of scanners and getting biopsies and test done pre-flight, during flight, post-flight. So this is a cardiac MRI scanner they go into here. So they get an MRI scan off their heart before the flight and again afterwards, and they get an ultrasound done off their heart known as an echocardiogram. And just below the red pointer there, you'll see the heart beating, doing its thing. And that's what you see on an echocardiogram. You can see the heart beating. So they get a good idea of every astronaut when they go up. They get a good idea of what his heart's like, his or her heart's like, how it's beating and how it's functioning. And as I've written at the bottom there, particularly to assess any changes when they get back in the shape or the size of the heart. Got a few pictures here inside the space station just to give you sort of an idea of what sort of stuff goes on in there. They've got a whole human sciences research lab department in the ISS where these astronauts a lot of the time are essentially wired till the hilt with instruments and monitors and so on. You'll see here one of this guy over here, he's got what they call a Holter monitor, which is an ECG or a cardiogram that's connected to a little monitor by his hip, and that records all his activities for a 24-hour block, and then he can do it again and so on and so on. And that's looking for any asymptomatic arrhythmias. You've got Kathy Coleman here in the bigger picture. She's wearing a continuous ECG monitor. You can see her little monitor thing there, monitor belt sitting on her waistline there. Once again, here's an astronaut here as well. So these guys are constantly being assessed with these Holter monitor studies. Once again, looking at the electrical circuits, looking for any conduction problems or arrhythmias. Blood pressure, ambulatory blood pressure studies. So here's an astronaut. He'll be wandering around all day and night, probably for a few days, with a blood pressure cuff attached to his arm, constantly going up, constantly going down. A few of the astronauts doing that, monitoring their blood pressures during their stay to see how their blood pressures are responding. Blood tests, if you don't like getting your blood test done, guys, don't go up into space, because that's what you're going to get done plenty of times. So they check for the electrolytes, that's sodium, potassium, their blood counts, that's their red blood cell counts, the white cell counts for the part of the immune system, platelet cells for clotting and so on. They'll do their liver and their kidney functions regularly. Biomarkers, that's sort of chemical markers, indicators of if the heart's under strain, factors of if there's excessive bone loss, certain biomarkers start to rise in the blood. If there's a potential clot going on somewhere in the system, markers called D-dimer, that will start to raise. So there's all sorts of biomarkers they can do to assess what's going on inside them. And this is relatively easy, non-sort of invasive stuff to do. Here's they do those echocardiogram scans, the ultrasound of the heart that I showed you they do before and after flight. They do those during flight. The astronauts get trained up how to do that, and there's one of the astronauts doing it on the space station with another one. Once again, checking out for any signs of structural changes in the heart, how it's functioning, its efficiency, and if anything does change, when in the mission did it change. In case you were wondering, let's just bring this back a bit here. So what are you looking at here? Okay, so this will be the lower part of the atrium down here, the top chamber. Everything's upside down here. And see the valve, the blood's going through, and there's your valve, flapping open, little flap valve. The blood's getting pushed through there into the much bigger left ventricle, and then that will be pushing it back towards and up over us. So that's what, those are little flap valves there. Cool. Okay, so they also started doing, just at random, just initially, what they call Doppler ultrasounds, little scans they can do of the carotid arteries. That's the main artery that supplies blood up to the head. But also the jugular veins. There's an external and a deep jugular vein that brings the blood back down from the head, back down towards the heart. So they're assessing the blood flow in the arteries and the veins in the heart, just to see what was going on there. And they got a bit of a surprise. In 2019, one of the astronauts was actually found that the internal jugular, so the deep jugular vein, important one, had completely clotted up. You've probably heard of the expression, a deep vein thrombosis, DVT. That immediately should ring alarm bells. That's potentially serious stuff. He had a DVT in the main vein coming down from his head down to his heart. So that's very serious. So fortunately, they had some Clexane, subcutaneous Clexane. It's a blood thinning agent that works very quickly. Luckily, they had that on the station. If you were to get a DVT tomorrow and you went and saw your doctor and, look, my leg's a bit swollen, and he did a blood test, your D-dimer's up or a scan, he'd immediately jab you with one of those straight away. First thing you'd get. So luckily, they had that in the medicine kit. So they started him on Clexane and arranged for him to come down, I think about a couple of months or a few weeks later in the next mission that was going back down. So they thought they'd better investigate this more formally. So in 2019 over to 21, they got 11 astronauts with an average stay of about 9 months. And I suppose I put a few little studies sprinkled through here. Notice the frustration, only 11 astronauts. It's not like you're doing a big medical trial in North America or Europe where you've got 5,000 patients on this drug and 10,000 on this drug and stuff. You're dealing with small numbers, so it is hard, but they do the best they can statistically. But out of here, all of those 11 astronauts, on keeping a constant scan of their veins in their neck, had reduced blood flow in their veins, their jugular veins. All astronauts had that. 2 of the astronauts had reversed blood flow. So instead of the blood coming down, it was on its way up, thank you very much. How crazy is that? But once again, you've got no gravity pulling everything down. It's freedom up there, man. It's woohoo. That's just the blood's flowing around, and that's potentially dangerous. But fortunately, there were no further clots. So they concluded that clotting is a possible risk. Don't really know. One person was unlucky enough to get it. And remember, you're dealing with healthy people here. You're in their 30s and 40s. There's no other at-risk factors going on. So you really got to question that. So now part of their blood, they have blood thinners now on their subsequent missions. It's a fairly new one, such and you're probably familiar with the dabigatran and rivaroxaban. It's called a pixaban. Yeah, so probably just ask for So they've got a pixaban up there, which is it's a new oral anticoagulant medication. And of course, they continue surveillance and biomarkers. So the biomarker's D-dimer that'll pick up if there's any inflammation going on. Simple blood test. Okay, so what are these guys going to do about all this cardiac deconditioning that's going on and the things they're discovering? If you don't like exercise, guys, that's another reason don't go into space if you're not one of these exercise people, because it's all about exercise, exercise, and exercise. And for the heart, your best thing you can do is in-flight aerobic training. So treadmill, there's 2 treadmills on the space station, and there's an exercycle. So ideally, the protocol I've worked out ideally for the heart up here is you're talking at about 4 to 6. Sorry, the red point is a little bit funny. I'm getting used to it. It's just a new little device we got. So instead of pointing directly up here, it goes to the computer so the guys on YouTube can see it. So it just takes a little bit of me getting used to, but that's all good. So 4 to 6 times per week for 30 to 45 minutes on the treadmill, and 2 to 3 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes an exercise session, up to 70 to 85% of your maximum heart rate. So it's not up there with the magazine just churning away, or 30 minutes is up. No, it's hard work up there. They work away. You see the guy, we'll talk about it later on, but the guy down here, he's on the treadmill. Notice he's all tethered down, because you might say, what are they? You know, you can see it's easy to strap someone on a bike, but the treadmill, so you can see right there, he's got the harness that holds them down. We'll talk more about that harness later because it's relevant, protecting the bones and muscles. Ideally, you need about 2 hours a day of exercise for cardiovascular protection in an ideal world. Now, the lower body negative pressure suit. This is it here. This guy here. Hey, let's try this new function out. Whoa, there it is there. So that's a very big, bulky system. It's attached to the wall, you can see there. And essentially, it's a big, baggy pair of trousers that seals around your lower torso, and then it creates a negative pressure. You pump the pressure out. And the idea behind it is the negative pressure in your lower torso and your legs then helps to drive the blood back down into your legs. And they use it for research and assessing the timing and the amount of cardiac deconditioning that's going on. But it's also used as a countermeasure. They will do it for 20 minutes once a day for the week prior to coming back to Earth, to get the legs again used to getting blood flowing back to the legs again. So that's they're also known as the Chibis suit, but it's big, bulky, and attached to the wall, and that makes it very restrictive. And for that reason, the Americans have developed a mobile lower body negative pressure suit. You can see it there. That hasn't flown yet. The studies have been numerous studies on it. Very, very happy. It's proven to be very, very worthy, good results, everything they wanted out of it. So hopefully that will be flying soon. This one here always reminds me, who saw Wallace and Gromit, the wrong trousers? It just reminds me of it. Yeah. Okay, so also when they land, here's this guy once again in a chair getting led away. If you don't like salt, this is not going to be a good one for you. But so just before landing, about sort of a 1 hour pre-landing, they give the astronauts a litre of either water or fruit juice, it doesn't matter, and they give you 8 salt tablets to bring the fluid and the salt levels up inside your system. That will increase your blood plasma volume by about 400 mils, and that's a significant boost and to help your blood pressure and minimise that orthostatic low blood pressure when you stand up. Very rarely they have to use it, but they can give you medications, vasoconstrictor medications for it. Very rarely have to do that, but almost what the Americans will do, the Russians tend not to do it, but the Americans frequently do, if they decide one of their astronauts is a little bit dehydrated and low blood pressure, either when they get back to their American headquarters, the medical thing, or in flight back to Hawaii, they'll put up some bag of saline, give them about 2 litres of normal saline to rehydrate them again. And the Americans do that not uncommonly. So that's the cardiovascular system. Let's do the other one that's related to weightlessness, is the effects on the bones and muscles, known as the musculoskeletal system. So let's look into that. So there's really the main points here is that the effects on bones and muscles in space It is rapid, like the cardiovascular changes. It's almost like on a dive. Things start happening very, very quickly to the body, and they are significant, but they are preventable, which we'll learn. So we're going to look into the bone loss, also known as osteoporosis, when bones start getting thin. And then we'll talk about muscular wasting, also known as muscular atrophy, when you start losing the bulk of your muscles. And as this is the same theme up here, and I've written it down here, you don't want an astronaut arriving at Mars lacking, not only is he cardiovascular-wise deconditioned, low blood pressure, he might also be lacking strength, hasn't got good balance, and he's got brittle bones. That's not a good scene, guys. So here's the bones. And why do we worry about it? Because bone loss increases your risk of getting a fracture. The moonwalkers had falls frequently. I'm sure you've probably all seen, you've seen scenes like this before looking at the Apollo astronauts. They had frequent falls on the moon. So remember, the falls on Mars are going to be probably twice as heavy. Instead of the 1/6 gravity on the moon, it's about 1/3 on Mars. So it's going to be twice as heavy. So if you have too many of those, you're going to end up with one of these. And I don't think you need to be a radiologist to realise that's not a good scene. Yeah. Houston, we have a problem. So this is normal bone structure. Just a bit of a review here. So it's like a lattice material bone structure, very hard material, and it's in that lattice, so it can be rock hard, but it can also be very, very light. Because you don't want big, heavy, solid bones. You wouldn't be able to walk around. So it's in that lattice, a very tight lattice that's lightweight but hard, and it is strong. And on Earth, there's a few factors that keep it that way. Our onwards force of gravity, every time you take a step, every time you move, every time you lift, even just standing still here, you are fighting against gravity, and you've got resistive forces going through your bones. Your bones respond to that. They like it. We tend to have a reasonable amount of calcium in our diet. But also, and I've purposely here, you might think, jeepers, what are you doing here introducing medical terms? I want to introduce these two cell types because we're going to talk about them more later. There's a nice balance been going on between osteoblasts and osteoclasts. They're made in the bone marrow, and osteoblasts stimulate calcium and structure to go into bones. They keep bones solid. Their job is to stimulate bone formation and keep things normal. You've got osteoclasts who do the opposite, and they promote leaching of bone material back or reabsorption back into the bloodstream and do the dead opposite. And like a lot of things in life, it's a check. It's things in balance. You've got to have that in life. So that's going on as well. So when you get osteoporosis, you start getting a thing off the bones, starts looking like this. As you can see, the density is a lot less. And that's what's happened with if you've got little resistance going on, like you're in space, you're exercising not without resistance, you've got no loading going on, your bone density goes down, and you get this sort of hollow, weak structure going on in your bones. And of course, as we spoke about, that increases your risk of fracture. The other thing here, and here's one of the reasons I mentioned osteoblasts, is that in microgravity and weightlessness, there's no resistance going on the bones, so you get your thinning of the bones, but you get decreased bone marrow stem cell differentiation into osteoblasts. And that refers to, you stop and think about it, all your main stem cells come from your bone marrow. And then stem cells are your primitive cells. They then develop into your more specialized cells. They don't know why, but that process seems to be inhibited in space. So you don't have to get too caught up, but the bottom line is you've got less osteoblasts going on, which means you sort of haven't got that nice factor trying to keep your bones nice and strong. My second point, I did want to put that into it and keep it out. Didn't want to dumb things down. To be aware of that, because my point being is that there's a lot of profound things that go on to the body in weightlessness than we really understand. You know, you could understand not with gravity, the resistant forces going through your body. You get your head around that. But there are a lot of other more profound factors going on, and that was the point that I put that in there. And the other point that I put that in there, you can see they're not sitting on their laurels, oh, well, we've got this with our exercise. They're researching the stuff all the time at a cellular and molecular level. NASA is researching this to great lengths and depths. And that was my other point of putting that in there. I seem to have reached a little thing with my slide thing here, Steve. I might just do it manually. That's it. Okay, so let's talk about bone mass loss without intervention. It happens very rapidly. Yeah, 1.5% of bone mass is lost per month on an astronaut in the International Space Station. To give you that an idea, your 80 or 90-year-old person sitting around doing nothing in a rest home, that's what they would lose in a year. And here, you've got guys in their 30s and 40s, fit, healthy men and women, and they're losing that same amount per month. That's if you do nothing, of course. This is without intervention. So with an extended stay in your hips and spine, which are the important parts of the body bone-wise, so you don't want to break them when you have it a fall on Mars, you lose up to 10 to 20% of your bone mass gets lost. That's significant. That then leads to increased fracture risk on Mars and Earth. Pretty slow recovery rate. It takes, if you don't do anything, you do get that. It takes 6 months to regain 60% of what you've lost. And it can be up to 2 years full recovery. Some astronauts are still struggling to fully recover their bone mass even at the 2-year mark. So you can see here, prevention is the key. So what sort of exercise do you get the astronauts doing to protect their bones? Back on the treadmill, and there's other devices which we'll talk about. So this is the protocol that they use to combine the cardiovascular with the musculoskeletal. It's 2.5 hours per day, 6 days a week of aerobic and resistance exercise. Both helps. As I've mentioned, there's 2 treadmills on the ISS, and here as we'll actually go down to this harness area here. Here's your harnesses just right here. They hold the astronaut down at about 85% of their workload, of their stress, of their normal body weight. Anything more than, ideally it would be 100%, anything more than about 85%, and it gets very, they actually use the word in the papers, extremely uncomfortable. You get squealing astronauts. So they usually cap it about 85% loading on that with that harness to create the resistance on the treadmill. Then there's another instrument called the ARED, which stands for the Advanced Resistance Exercise Device. And that has creates resistance. It looks like a weightlifting type of machine you see in the gym, but it creates the impression of resistance and weight through using various pistons moving through vacuum tubes. And it also has a cable-powered flywheel assembly. So you've got that inertial, rotational momentum, inertia resistance going on in there that they're pulling about. That seems to be the latest craze, isn't it? There's all the ads on the internet for the new flywheel machines. So they use that resistance machine, which has a flywheel and pistons, to create the resistance. It's very, very versatile, that machine. It's pretty sophisticated. It's a bit more than your average piece of material in your gym. It's designed pretty much to handle an astronaut of any shape or size, and also they can pick out just pretty much any muscle group in the body they can select for their workouts with it. It's pretty crammed up there, isn't it, with all the gear and stuff? But it's quite good putting these pictures in here just for you to see, what sort of gear they have got up there, because these are not the pictures that you see, in your pretty books and stuff. After the exercises, what can they do? And I'm about to show you some study results whereby the exercise actually is not enough. And that's where you're able to bring in medications. There's a class of drugs called bisphosphonates. And remember I talked about the osteoblasts that promote bone formation, and then you've got the osteoclasts that tend to leach it away and promote reabsorbing of the bone material into the blood. Well, that was the osteoclasts. This class of drugs inhibits the activities of the osteoclasts. So they're working on the other side of the balance equations. There's 2 drugs that are commonly used. These are very, very common drugs used every day in general practice. Alendronate, also known as Fosamax. 1 tablet once a week. And I once heard an endocrinologist describe it. It's like painting cement over the bones. It just makes those bones rock hard, solid. So that's what the astronauts have been using recently in the last 2 to 3 years. However, it's got a side effect. You can get it on Earth too. Some people get it with reflux with it, heartburn. And of course, in space, you've got no gravity, so you're more likely to get reflux. So a lot of the astronauts grumble a little bit. They're getting heartburn and reflux on this alendronate. But there is another version, which once again you use in general practice quite happily, called zolendronate, also known as A-cluster. And that's an intravenous form. You hook a drip up, you run it through in about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes in an infusion, and that's it for the next 18 months. Just works away quietly to itself, solidifies the bones, no pills, nothing. And it makes sense that they hopefully will start using some zolendronate. You'd probably give it pre-flight, maybe a dose before you leave Earth, and maybe another dose before you leave Mars again, on your way home again. Give yourself another dose of it. So that's zolendronate. That medication, that class of drugs, as I'm about to show you in a trial, has changed everything. They're game changers. They're game changers on Earth, for that matter. The other thing is a good diet with vitamin D supplements, and a good high calcium diet is very beneficial for the bones as well.
Well, they say that you need vitamin K or vitamin D to properly absorb the calcium in the bones. Vitamin D alone, it takes it up from the digestive system, but it doesn't help deposit it in the bones.
Most people with studies, I find, and just even in like general practice, you don't actively have to give people vitamin K. Very few people, most people have enough in their diet. You don't actively have to give it as an extra. And I know the studies, they just like these studies, the astronauts, but yeah, vitamin K is all part and parcel of that, but usually there's sufficient in your body, in your diet for it. You don't have to give it as an extra thing. Okay, now here's that study that I promised you. Now I think I'm just going to, if I got a little bit out of track with the slides, yeah. So vitamin D, high calcium diet. Here we go. So once again, haul your astronauts in and out of those scanning machines. So here's a bone density scanning. They do the astronauts before they fly, when they get back again, and at 6 months and 12 months after they've been back again, they get bone density scans. Very good data with using your medications and your exercise and your diet and your vitamin D. Significantly reduce bone mass loss. And let's have a look at some studies. So there was a study in 2022 that came out with 17 astronauts. It was a friend who pointed it out to me, Phil in Melbourne. And he said, oh, there's a new study come out. That was earlier this year. They got these astronauts, that missions for greater than 6 months. They gave them the full exercise protocol and they gave them some vitamin D. And they had ongoing, even up to 12 months post-flight, ongoing significant bone loss in their lower, typically in their hips and spine, and also in their tibia, in their lower leg. And I thought, really? Why did they bother? I said, look, I haven't got round to seeing that. I probably will look at that this week. That's this paper. But even without looking at it, I'll tell you right now, they weren't on the bisphosphonates, were they, the medications? Sure enough, so curiosity got the better of me. I dug it up that night, the paper, and sure enough, they weren't. There was a study done in 2019, 3 years prior, with 18 astronauts, with the combined bisphosphonates and the advanced resistance exercise device. It's got a mind of its own, that's all good. No significant bone loss. None. Just with the medications and the exercise. So those bisphosphonates are game changers. Parathyroid hormone is another hormone in the body, and that also plays an important role in bone protection, keeping our bones nice and strong. It's not, so if you want to start giving astronauts parathyroid hormone, it's not stable in the gastric system. So you'd have to have a daily injection of it. I think the astronauts have quite had enough of needles for the day, thanks very much. So what they did do, they've genetically modified a lettuce that produces its own parathyroid hormone. So you can eat it in lettuce form. Admittedly, you've got to have 8 cups a day, so which really, you know, you've had your bowl of salad today, haven't you? Yeah, you heaped a bowl of salad every day. It's rarely grown in space. So I've got a couple of slides here just to show you. Just once again, just cool. So here's an astronaut with some radish saplings just in one of the plant habitats. They grow lettuce and radish on the space station. So we've just got a couple of slides here because this is the sort of slides you don't see when you see pictures of astronauts. So I just threw them in here just to give you some insight. Yeah, they're busy up there. They're working on us going to Mars. We're going to have to grow our own crops. All this research is being done. Oh, we can't move on. Just bear with us, guys. Why don't I just do it manually? Just simply click on that. I have got a spinning wheel. So I think if I just give that a little bit of time. So the next picture is a picture of Scott Kelly and one of his colleagues, and they're growing the radishes there. Here we go. It's all right. We've got a spinning wheel again. It's all good. I'll just push them less often. So, so with your bone loss, it's important. It increases your risk of a fracture very, very significantly. The ways around it is your 2.5 hours of resistance and aerobic exercise. Here they are, per day, 6 days a week. Your tablets, your bisphosphonates, and your diet. And here they are here, eating radishes. I'm just going to do this very slowly. Here we go. So that's your bone loss or your osteoporosis. How about muscle wasting or atrophy? Let's have a look at that. And yeah, as we've talked about, muscle tissue is important for muscle strength and stability. It's your muscles that are going to stop you having those falls in the first place, hopefully, which then can lead to your broken bones. As if with bones and the cardiovascular, the changes occur very, very quickly in space. Muscle tissue losses, you lose mass and you lose muscle strength really, really quickly. 20% of muscle mass and 30% of your muscle strength over the first month in space. Yeah, that's significant. If you'd found you'd lost 20% of your muscle mass and 30% of your strength, you'd be squealing. And these are fit, healthy guys in their 30s and 40s in the space station, just for 1 month. And of course, that leads to weakness and it leads to poor posture. Poor posture itself can be a real problem. And the astronauts return to work, when they return to Earth, over half of them report ongoing back and neck pains. This is more the astronauts who are in these early stages, who they hadn't quite got all mapped out yet, so they didn't have so much in the countermeasures. Astronauts historically have been found to have 4 times a risk of a spinal disc prolapse. If you're familiar with one of those, you do not want a disc prolapse in a hurry. They're very painful, it can go on and on. Once again, the research that's going on, the astronauts, they're back in those scanning machines again. So they do MRI scans before and post-flight to have a look at their muscle mass and also biopsies. They get needles stuck in their legs to have a look at their muscles and look at it at a microscopic level. And just as they do on the cardiovascular level, and the bones in that too, as I've written here, yet a lot of advanced research is going on, cellular, molecular, genetic levels. They're really taking all of this very seriously and involving identification and modulation of genes, how things respond in space with your bones and muscles. Enzymes, various enzymes if they think that may be involved in the breakdown, the premature breakdown of muscles. So I try and identify these enzymes. How can we modify these enzymes or block these enzymes? Hormones are involved. And the idea is then to better understand it, create new therapies to help modulate these changes that are going on. So minimizing it with, I mentioned 2.5 hours per day, 6 days a week. Aerobic and resistance exercise gives good results for muscles. But there's another device. So I've talked the treadmill with the harness load, the ARED we've talked about. This device here is the MARES device. And it stands for Muscle Atrophy Research and Exercise System Complex. And it's a very, very sophisticated piece of equipment. They use it to assess the various sort of exercises, what muscle groups you're doing with what types of exercises, to what degree and so on. So it records and monitors the various sort of torque and process and forces going through different muscle groups at different times. And they use this not only as a countermeasure, but also to assess the degree of deconditioning that's going on, get some real science data from it. Pretty much like your trousers that the lower pressure, the negative pressure trousers. Then there's a penguin suit. You think, really, what does that look like? Looks like this. And it's a suit that the astronauts will wear for a length of time whereby it's got it's a jumpsuit, a series of elastic pulleys, attachments, inserts, springs, and so on, whereby every movement you go to do, you've got 40 kilograms worth of resistance, the equivalent of 40 kilograms on Earth of resistance in any type of movement you do. So that's an ingenious little device. That once again helps to give them some resistance and keeps the muscles working. Then some further research, they're just always in it, once again, they're looking at it from all angles, and some research has found that the essential amino acid supplements and 30 grams of carbohydrate, like just a banana is 30 grams of carbohydrate, having that as a supplement or a snack 3 times daily minimises muscular wasting due to inactivity, irrelevant of exercise and other factors. So, hey, it's no big deal. That's not a bad thing to do, to have some amino acid supplements and a banana or a potato or something, some supplement 3 times. So it's your exercise, your optimal diet, your supplements, all these combine to give very, very good results. Then, of course, you've got the engineering side of stuff. It's to be the holy grail. Get some, like sort of Space Odyssey 2001, get some sort of centrifuge or some sort of rotating part of the spacecraft up there to create artificial gravity. You could argue that would be the holy grail. You might say a significant engineering and cost challenge, but I'd like to think they could get some centrifuges or some part of the spacecraft rotating. I don't think that would be too difficult over the next 10 to 15 years to come up with that. They did do some studies with in-flight centrifuge in the Space Shuttle 1998, and it was in the neuro lab that they had, so it was more testing on the neurological system. They did find, I think they went for, 16-day centrifuge, half G, 20-minute every second day. They weren't checking muscles and bones at that stage, but they did notice there was an improvement or minimisation in the cardiovascular deconditioning. So it did play some role, and I can see that sort of happening in the future where it's going to be heading as well.
Interesting, Chris, they thought about this back in the day of 2001, a Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
The space station that was rotating to create artificial gravity.
So, it might be a challenge, but I think, we're up to that. Yep. So that's cardiovascular, musculoskeletal from prolonged weightlessness. Let's talk about the other big one. Radiation, ionizing radiation. That refers to high energy, high speed charged particles traveling through space that are powerful enough such that they can knock electrons off. They can ionize atoms and cause damage to human tissue. In particular, DNA is a very important piece of tissue that they damage. So that's what we're referring to here. And the reason we're protected on Earth is that there's 2 factors. One is our atmosphere protects to a degree. A lot of these charged particles, some of them they ionize, and some of the harsh radiation from the sun gets absorbed and processed in the atmosphere through ionizing molecules in the atmosphere and losing the relevant amount of energy. But also very, very more importantly is our magnetosphere. Because we've got a swishing liquid iron core at the centre of the Earth as the Earth rotates around, of course it's electrically conducting iron. It's moving. What does it do? It creates magnetic fields. So the Earth is surrounded by magnetic field lines that are enshrouding the Earth. It's called a magnetosphere, global magnetosphere is what it's called. And that protects us. So all these charged particles coming from space, they get attracted to the magnetosphere, the magnetic field lines, and then get deflected away from the Earth and usually down towards the poles of the Earth, and that's your aurora that you see, the flashing lights. So that gives us a lot of protection. So en route to Mars, you've got minimal protection. You certainly got no atmosphere. You got a metal wall, but that's not without its problems, which is another talk. But you've certainly got no magnetosphere up there in space. Mars has got a very thin atmosphere, so you've got very little protection as far as the atmosphere is concerned, and it does not have a global magnetosphere. So that's a problem. And as I put here, the tissue damage, which we're going to talk about shortly, you'll get to see a bit more of this, but you don't want an astronaut arriving at Mars with illness, vulnerable to infection, infertile with high cancer risk, with brittle bones, weak muscles, and a deconditioned cardiovascular system. So let's look closer into this. So where do these high energy charged particles come from? Two sources. One is the sun. The sun is constantly giving its solar wind. Yes, sure, there's some charged particles in there streaming out. But the sun also has these what they call solar particle events. And it's usually either solar flares or coronal mass ejections, CMEs, where you get sudden big blasts of solar activity and a huge masses of charged particles from the sun heading towards Earth or your spaceship between Earth and Mars. And so these are intermittent blasts, sudden high doses of highly charged particles associated with solar activity. Second place where they come from is from just elsewhere in the galaxy, called galactic cosmic radiation. And it's just a continuous low dose flux of high energy charged particles. How did they get there? Where are they from? Probably high energy events way out in the galaxies, like supernova explosions or gamma ray bursts, which another topic, so we'll talk about those. So, what effects does it have on the body? And it is really related to the dose, the amount that you've been exposed to, the rate at which you're exposed to it, and also how much radiation you've been exposed to long term that you've accumulated. You break it into acute radiation effects and chronic. The word acute refers to something that's quick and short onset. Quick onset, and it's just a short period of time, it's usually more dramatic. The word chronic typically it refers to more than 6 weeks, but it refers to a more insidious, slow onset and something, that process that's just dragging on, and you tend to use the word chronic for that. So let's look at acute radiation effects. And it usually happens within hours towards days, and typically it affects regions in the body that have very high cell turnover rates. They're more vulnerable and susceptible to this acute radiation. So the gastrointestinal system, you're nauseated, you're vomiting, you're diarrhea. Of course, that leads to you're going to be very dehydrated and weak, low on salts and so on. Bone marrow suppression, which we've talked a little bit about the bone marrow today. It suppresses your red blood cells, so you're going to get anemic. It suppresses your white cells, which are involved in the immune system, so you're going to be vulnerable to infection. It affects the platelet cells that get made in the bone marrow, so you're going to be more prone to bleeding. Central nervous system. Astronauts, or just people exposed acutely to radiation at risk of confusion. Ataxia, that means unsteady on your feet, wobbling. Convulsions, coma, death. Not nice. So chronic radiation, what happens if you just get exposed long-term, low dose, but just constant ongoing exposure over months and years? Carcinogenic mutations, the DNA getting damaged for reproduction, so you're more prone to cancers. Immunodeficiencies, your immune system is deficient, so you can't fight infections so well, you can't even battle cancers for that matter. Coronary heart disease, hardening and narrowing of the coronary arteries. Infertility, we mentioned. Cataracts affect the eye. Cognitive dysfunction, your ability to think and process thoughts. And I just put here pictures of two very prominent pioneer American astronauts here that you could argue passed away relatively prematurely through radiation. Neil Armstrong, he died aged 82 on the table. He had ongoing treatment with coronary heart disease. And you might argue, well, he was in his 80s. Yeah, he had problems with it for some years leading up to that. And I don't consider anyone dies in their 70s. I wouldn't call that, that's relatively premature. People are cruising well into their 80s, 90s these days. But also, okay, you only had 24 astronauts that went to the moon, small number. But it was a higher number of those guys had problems with cardiac problems, in particular coronary heart disease. Sally Ride died of pancreatic cancer, age 61. Once again, a form of cancer. Okay, pancreatic cancer does occur, but I just thought, just food for thought. She was the first, of course, everyone knows Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, and Sally Ride was the first American woman in space. So both pioneers. So that's your acute and your chronic effects of radiation on the body. How much radiation is acceptable to you, me, or NASA? Who's doing the talking? So NASA, well, not just NASA for that matter, in medicine, for terms of radiation, like for radiology, you use the Sievert as the unit you use. And it's a measure of the amount of potential damage you can do to human tissue with radiation, whether it be acute or chronic. So they use the CFERT. 1 milli-CFERT equates to about 3 chest x-rays. NASA's current limit is a total cumulative career exposure of about 600 milli-CFERTs, which equates to a 3% increased risk of dying from a radiation-induced cancer. So that's where they draw the line. The astronauts themselves have all agreed that's a reasonable risk to take. We've all got a risk of cancer, so they've got that as a background, but they've got an added 3% chance of getting a radiation-induced cancer and dying from that. So it's fatal. 1 year on the International Space Station, you get exposed to about 240 milli-CFERTs, which equates to about 1.4% increased risk of having a fatal radiation-induced cancer. So, how about our journey to Mars? Mr. NASA, who's knocking on your door. 3-year trip, which have allowed for, say, 9 months each way with current technology, and 500 day stay on Mars. Going by the data, the Mars Science Laboratory, which is the Curiosity spacecraft, that had a radiation detector, and they measured the radiation the whole way to Mars and while they're on Mars. And they worked out that would give an astronaut exposure of about 1,000 milli-CFERTs, which equates to about a 5.5% increase risk of lifetime fatal cancer from radiation. So there's options around that. Now that I've put in here, that involves today's current propulsion, which we're going to talk about shortly in shielding. That's by today's standards, but we're going to Mars, well I hope you're going to Mars in 2035. And of course you've got an option of signing a waiver, which you've always got one of those options. There's a bit of controversy around it. The NASA is having talks with people and lawyers and astronauts and so on. They're thinking of adjusting that because a lot of female astronauts, they say, look, we're happy to take a higher risk. And of course, it affects their more fertility, but they're more prone to breast cancer, and they get more lung cancer. No one knows why, but do with radiation. So they're sort of saying we don't want to get our careers held back from this. So there is talk of perhaps increasing that or a level right across the board. That's very, very controversial, so I won't go there, but just, yeah, if you want to delve into it, you can Google it and have a bit of a read yourself. There's a few papers on that. So what are we going to do about radiation? And that's why I put that covenant in there too, is that's by today's propulsion and shielding standards. The main countermeasures for radiation shielding, propulsion systems, and effective monitoring. So let's look at shielding. Of course, thickened aluminium and stuff, that helps to a degree, but your problem with your thickening up your spacecraft is you get these high energy big particles. They can strike the material on the spacecraft that then creates a sort of a cascade of secondary particles, and those secondary particles can have enough energy in them to do you harm. So that's not necessarily all good. Hydrogen has your best element to protect you against radiation. Why? It's got the highest charge to mass ratio. It's got one charge and it's got one proton. So the beauty about having a charge, it's good at deflecting or absorbing other charged particles coming towards you. It can also help to break up and fragment some of the big ones, safely break them up, fragment them. And once again, hydrogen itself, it's only one proton. So it's not a big molecule itself that runs the risk of getting split up and creating that secondary radiation through that cascade. So it's a very effective, safe, it's the best, most effective and safe material. So what's full of water? Water and ethylene, they both have per molecule, they have 2 hydrogen atoms per molecule, so it makes sense to use them. So one option is have your water tank, some sort of polyethylene, some sort of water tanks around you, and have your water tanks all stashed around your spacecraft. So that's one way you can do it. Mars, once you get to Mars, maybe 5 to 10 meters of soil over your habitat will be a good protection. Local magnetic field lines. Yeah, remember I said Mars does not have a global magnetosphere, but it does have little localized regions of magnetic fields. Have I got, yes, okay, we're in a little spin again here. So instead of having the magnetic field lines all going right around it, and here we go, it's come up. You've got little regions on Mars, little regional areas where you do have some magnetic fields coming up. And that goes up, they go up to a few kilometres up into space, more around the equatorial regions on Mars. So it makes sense you could build your habitat within those regions, would also give you a degree of protection. So you've got options. Check this out, a Mars water ice home concept. It's good enough for the Eskimos, it's good enough for us. But it just makes sense when I first saw that. I thought, you know what? We've just been talking about water, how great it is. Yeah, water ice. Make some homes out of some water ice concept. So that's something that's been an idea that's been thrown around. Further to shielding, developing new materials. And there's a lot of research that's been going on over the last 15 to 20 years. And probably the most successful one that's coming out is the stuff where they've got sort of tiny little nanotubes of boron and nitrate all netted together, and they've impregnated them with hydrogen. So they're very, very good shielding. Ideal properties, fantastic radiation shielding, it's been hydrogenated. Very flexible, very strong, and it's electrically insulating. Very, very effective. So they can see huge potentials for this: spacecraft, habitats, vehicles, spacesuits. It's great protection, it's very strong, and it's very flexible. That material will probably be the future. They're developing more, they're getting better and better at making more and more of it cheaply. So I believe that's where the future will be for shielding. So that's your shielding. How about propulsion systems? So if we take 9 months to get there, 9 months come back, what say we did it quicker? It's another way. Current chemical propulsion, great for thrust, for getting going somewhere, lighting up some chemicals, that's great. But it has its constraints. It starts getting very, very inefficient when you start getting higher and higher velocities to go faster and faster. It becomes very inefficient fuel-wise, and then you're going to start running into problems of having to carry more heavy fuel with you. So there are other options. One is nuclear. And how they would do that is they would have cryogenically stored liquid hydrogen. You have a chamber that you warm up with nuclear fission of uranium. You pass the cryogenically cooled hydrogen into that. That heats up, and then you spit that out the back of your spacecraft. And they're talking tens of thousands of kilometres an hour. They can spit that out and create huge amounts of propulsion. They estimate that with that, they could probably halve the transit time to Mars, so maybe 4 or 5 months. Problem with that is storing cooled hydrogen. Hydrogen is very small and it's very volatile. It's explosive, and of course it's the smallest atom there is, and it can, as a liquid, it could just creep out anywhere through the tiniest of pores. And that's why the Artemis space, the new NASA ship that's ready to go to the moon, they've rolled it out and rolled it back in again, rolled it out again, because they were having the sensors were picking up that possibly more hydrogen was leaking than they would have liked. You can't stop the process. It's going to find little nooks and crannies to get out of, but you're set a certain amount, but it's a problem. So that is a potential problem, storing it on the spacecraft. Ion propulsion, that's where you get a chamber with high electrical currents, you put something that's a stable ion like xenon in there, you create a plasma from it, you bombard it up with neutrons, bombard it, ionize it, create a plasma. You then use big magnetic fields down the back of your spacecraft, charge those plasma down there and send it out as your propulsion exhaust. That's very efficient on fuel. There's a problem with it, very low acceleration, but once you get going, it continues to go, and you can get up to high speeds with it. It does require a reasonable amount of electricity, so that's a potential problem. This technology is well advanced. The ion propulsion they used on the Dawn mission to a couple of asteroids, I think Ceres invested, it was 2015. So this is well developed. Okay, how are you going to supply electricity, say, for the ion? You've got nuclear. They can actually quite happily generate electricity generators. You've got solar panels you could do to generate electricity. The answer will probably lie with a hybrid, just like our cars, hybrids. You could perhaps use nuclear and ion for your main ones and just use chemicals for thrusters, just launching from Mars or from Earth, or you want to do a course correction, use your chemical thrusters for that, but otherwise go nuclear or ion. So, and the other one is effective monitoring, and they've already got this down to perfection. Little dose meters that every astronaut would wear one. radiographers and radiologists in hospitals these days, they all wear those things. They get monitored for how much radiation exposure. That's not new technology. That's very well developed. So that's not a problem. Monitoring solar activity. Once again, they're getting better and better. They're doing that all the time and getting better and better, trying to predict how the sun behaves. You also do have a bit of a time before those particles would get out to Earth and then onto the orbit of Mars, so they can get a few days warning and say, hey, you've got a solar storm on its way. They might have a safe part in the spacecraft that's got extra water around or extra protection. Hey guys, you've got a solar storm going on, and tomorrow, you know, we want you to hang out in that particular chamber of the spacecraft. So that's why go to Mars. That's your physical challenges and proposed countermeasures. Let's sum up and conclude now. So journey to Mars is essential to long-term survival of the human race. Yes, there are multiple challenges involved. The three big ones are related to prolonged weightlessness and exposure to radiation. Concerning weightlessness, it mainly affects the cardiovascular system, which is your heart and your body fluids, your musculoskeletal, which involves your bones and your muscles. Countermeasures, exercise, aerobic and resistance exercise. Your medicines like your bisphosphonates, your hormone replacement therapies and so on you've got. Your supplements, better nutrition, calcium, carbohydrates, proteins. And then we talked about artificial gravity. Radiation exposure, as we talked about, can cause acute, that's very quick, rapid onset, dramatic illnesses, and of course more long-term illnesses, including cancers and infertility. Countermeasures is there's a lot of technology that's being developed at the moment for shielding, which I can't see any reason why they can't start adapting into going to Mars. Better propulsion technology, this stuff is well advanced. You go and Google it. There's loads of papers, engineering papers on all this stuff. It's not pipe dream material. It's out there. The engineers are well down the line, big research laboratories and research facilities firing these engines up. They're waiting for you to board. And of course, monitoring. So that pretty much sums it up. And I hope I've showed you that with advanced technology, come 2035, when this NASA man knocks on your door, safe travel is achievable. So I hope you've enjoyed Hazards of Human Spaceflight to Mars, things you need to know. Thank you. So what are you going to tell the NASA man tomorrow morning? Who would go, now after all that, so we're talking 2035, so another, another sort of 15, close to 15 odd years. Down the line, you've heard my argument, where it's all heading. Who would say, yeah, that'd probably be me. Yeah, that'd be me. Give it a go. $1 million US. You can take your cats. Boston's going, return trip. 3 years, return trip. Years 2035, no family commitments. Sense of adventure. You're only concerned about your safety. You know it's US dollars. You know you can take your cats. So it's just going to come down to really, how safe are you? So, sorry, what's...
Even though you're only 69.
I'm only 23. True story. No, as my thought experiment, you're 35 years of age. Yep. So, yeah, any takers? Oh, you big bunch of wusses. Yeah, Sergeant, yeah, good man, yeah, exactly. So you're not all bloody pussies, big wusses. I'm counting on, I certainly hope so. Very good point. Seriously, any questions, guys, on any of that? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the local magnetic fields on Mars. How strong are those relative to Earth?
Oh, because Earth, you've got a global magnetosphere. You're going to need to look that up. I don't carry that on the top of my head, to be honest. And I don't beat myself up the fact that I don't. They are there and they are appreciable and they are mentioned frequently in this whole topic. So I think they do offer a reasonable amount of protection. But I couldn't tell you any exact figures, to be honest. Yes?
Can we take parrots to Mars?
Parrots?
Yeah.
I can't see why not. Yeah. Yeah. Gavin.
Have they done any studies into the psychological effects? Because it's a different sort of thing to going to the space station where you're near the Earth. It's a long trip, a long way from Earth, and what's going to be a smaller craft. And even if you take it from 9 months to 3 months,
Yep.
there and back, it's a long trip with less people and less interaction. What sort of effect is that going to have psychologically?
Yeah, so the question is, the psychological effects of one of such a journey. And it's been well and truly studied. There are studies going, isolation groups going on, they've been going on for years and they've studied it well. The big problems tend to be people getting withdrawn, getting lonely, long distance from home, distance from family and friends, lack of autonomy, overwork, enclosed in the same alien environment. They found the best way around it. Don't overwork your astronauts. Pre-screen them before you go. You're not going to pick someone who's, you think, oh, jeepers, I don't know really how settled they are. So you're going to pick people with stamina. You're going to train your crew to look out for what symptoms and signs to look out for in their fellow crew that might be getting anxious or depression. If someone starts getting withdrawn, losing an interest, they don't want to join in with the mealtime and stuff. Those are little flags that are going up. So it's identification of those factors, pre-selecting them. And they've found with studies, things like rotating the commander's role makes a difference. Giving them a movie night, giving them a day off to check them, giving them even every day. They've got a little bit of time at the end of the day to check emails, communicate with family, that's important. But give them some entertainment to do, non-work related stuff. Movie night, out of all the studies that have been done, one of the big key success things is a day off and a movie night. Yeah, and it's those simple things. You know, what else can you do? But it's been well studied, and the studies continue to go on. But that's a very, very good point. And it's those things that seem to be the best things to do. Watch everyone. Everyone looks out for one another, watches them closely. Give them a degree of autonomy. Don't overwork them, and give them some recreation time and time to communicate with friends and family on Earth. So that seems.
I've got a question.
Yes.
You talked about one of the reasons for doing this was because of the problem of the US being everything in one basket, all the eggs in one basket, so to speak. But how feasible is it to set up a self-sustaining colony on Mars, not one that relies on supplies coming from the Earth periodically? So you have to do that, you've got to be completely self-sufficient in terms of food production, technology and everything. Basically.
Absolutely terraforming inside. This, like everything in life, is the initial baby steps. You've got to take baby steps no matter what you do. A marathon starts with one step. And it's the same here. These are just baby steps. You're talking hundreds of years down the line, terraforming and getting people to live permanently there and stuff. That's in a whole different league of discussion in itself, yeah. But yeah, so we're just talking, really just going to Mars, these first pioneers. Would you go for a return? We're talking return trip within 3 years. But yeah, as Bill said, there's some big challenges ahead, on the road ahead. Yeah, and I think you're looking at hundreds of years, yeah. And there will be some disasters and some tragedies and mishaps along the way, I'm sure. Yep, but very good.
One other thing, there was a proposal to send a one-way trip to Mars, and I was amazed at how many people applied to do it.
I think everyone realised that was sort of semi in jest, and they're really can't have been that serious. So I'm sure a lot of people would go, yeah, I'd give that a go, put my name down. It's a little bit different to, I think, NASA knocking on your door, but yeah. But I actually had a chat with someone about that yesterday. Yeah.
Sideways question, but this
Something
phosphates,
went wrong.
the
Please try.
bisphosphates you were talking about.
Yeah, the bisphosphonates, yes.
The bone density, is that an application presently with the health of Earthlings?
Yes, absolutely. Your Fosamax. Thousands of women are walking up and down New Zealand streets right now on that Fosamax. That's the alendronate. I've traded as a GP. Gosh, I've given thousands and thousands over the last 15 years of prescriptions for Fosamax for usually postmenopausal women, or you might get a younger man who falls over and breaks his hip or something. You think, oh, that's odd. You do a scan, and his thin bones. And these alendronates, the infusion, general practices up and down the country, all around the world, are just given those all day. I was going to say all day, every day, it's an exaggeration, but probably at least most medical centres would probably, the one I worked at, would probably give on average one a day, amongst 4 or 5 doctors. Every single day someone would be hooked up there with an alendronate infusion going on. So and that's, I think your point too, is the spin-offs goes both ways. Here they're dipping into sort of technology that's been around for a while, but the vice versa goes on too. There's a lot of spinning off coming from all this research, and that's where I made the point, talking about osteoblasts and osteoclasts, with what's going on at bone marrow level and cellular level and molecular levels. All this research is huge spin-offs and is going to create new therapies to help everyday people on the street. Absolutely. Yep. Yes.
Just out of interest, how long does it take to send a transmission from Mars to Earth?
Yes. Now that is the time. Is it about at its closest? Is it 20 minutes? Yeah.
Going the other side.
Going the other side. It's the other side of the sun, because it orbits twice, does 2 laps every time Earth does two orbits every time Mars does 1. So at other times it's going to be far away. When they're at their closest, it's about 20 minutes.
Probably they can have a satellite, an L2 or L1, to act as a relay or something for when it's in solar conjunction.
Yeah, they probably
still
will.
communicate with you.
Yeah, because they're going to want to get around the sun too. I don't think they'd ever want to lose contact with Earth. So I think they would definitely have that for when they're one of the Lagrange points, stable gravitational points. They'd have a permanent satellite there would be going around, so they'd be able to, satellite-wise. And I would imagine you're talking... Right, yep. So you'd be talking a few hours in that regards, but 20 minutes when they're at their closest. Yeah.
What about the G-forces travelling to Mars?
So that's all going to come down to acceleration. Of course, you only get G-forces when you're accelerating, but the problem is going to be if you've experienced no acceleration forces on the way there, and then suddenly you're exposed to them coming down to land on Mars and then blasting off and so on. It's an extra load and stress on the body. That's where your resistance training for your bones and your muscles are going to keep you conditioned well enough where you'll handle that sort of stuff. And maybe centrifuge sessions or part of the spacecraft rotating with artificial gravity. But that's an important thing you've got to be aware of. It's all very well travelling in space, but you've got to think. What's it going to be like for the astronaut who arrives at Mars? Cardiovascular decondition, low blood pressure, weak muscles and brittle bones. Steps off the lander, falls over the first rock, breaks his leg. Houston, we have a problem. Not a good scene. Niven.
One of the downsides of sending any living organism to Mars is the contamination of the currently pristine-ish scientific environment. Is it too much of a vanity project to send people there, or do you think people will be able to do more science more quickly than the autonomous systems we send there?
On Mars or in the space? Mars, yeah.
If you send an astronaut, they can do some great science, but they're also almost inevitably going to contaminate the environment.
We are going to contaminate the environment.
Between, we've discovered life on Mars. It's
us. So Niven's raised the point about at what point, currently it's sterile up there. All those spacecraft have been sterilised. If we find life up there, we know it's organic life from Mars, it's native life. But once we start getting up there as human beings, start digging and ferreting around and doing our thing, we're going to be contaminating Mars, and you've lost that window of opportunity to say, this life was definitely native of Mars. You won't know anymore. And there's arguments both ways saying we should leave each planet as a reserve and stuff. And then you get other people who say, for God's sake, get over here. Just get up there, guys. Just forget about it. Get over yourself. Just get in there and muck in, So it's a philosophical question, But I think sooner or later you just got to do it.
Chris, have some samples already been taken? Because the Chinese have indicated they're not going to worry about cross-contamination. So as soon as they go up there, they're going to just do their thing. So I believe that there's already been some samples secured for later.
Yes, they have. Yes.
They're not being returned yet.
Yes, correct. Yep, they have. They haven't been returned. Yep, correct. And you're quite right, you know, Andrew's raised the point here, it's all going to come down to international communication and cooperation. And all it takes is one space agency. We're not interested in doing none of that. We'll do our own thing. Thank you very much. So it is welcome to the human race. Yeah, we're a funny bunch. But yes, they have already got samples up there already on the lantern now that are, I think, they're debating what they're going to do about them and when and how they get them back. But yeah. So, yeah, okay, guys. So interesting.
Question from online, Chris.
Oh yes.
So this was talking about propulsion and shortening the time to get to Mars. So the comment from John was, all very good at achieving high velocity en route to your destination, but you'll need to slow down. How are we going to achieve that in a reasonable time frame?
I think you slow down. That's what thrusters are for, to a degree, John. You use thrusters. That's more of an engineering problem than a medical problem. The research here. But I would have thought that actually also alludes to Neville's issue about decelerating when you're coming to Mars as well. So how to do it engineering-wise, thrusters, the same way you got up to that speed. You've also got, you can, I'm sure, do little loops and various orbital mechanics, but that's not my forte, so I won't go there. But you've got deceleration, and that's why you're conditioning your astronauts for that.
And then another a comment, more a comment, talking about the increased risk of getting cancer, and then comparing that to the risk of cancer from a smoker, and saying that the increased risk for an astronaut is tiny.
Yeah, exactly. And you put that sort of stuff in perspective, absolutely. And I think smokers have just got no idea what's going on when they're puffing away there. But anyway, that's a very, very valid point. Putting life in perspective, absolutely. Yep. Okay, guys, so otherwise, have fun, drive home carefully, wait for that knock on the door from NASA, and have fun. Good night. Thank you.